to this week's book club episode of Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. My name is Megan, and my fantastic co-host is...
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Welcome. If you are new to our podcast, we are your imperfect homeschool mom friends. We are pretty tired of shiny, perfect influencers. It's just not real, right? We show up as our authentic selves, and sometimes that's a hot mess, right? But we are who we are, right? Today, we both have clean hair, and I've got a new lipstick, but it's not always like that. If you caught last week's episode, very different viewpoint on my end of the camera. So, but we show up as we are. We will never pretend to you that our lives are perfect. And then you're sitting there going, how come I can't seem to measure up to all of that, right?
Well, yeah. And let's also point out for those who are just tuning in and you haven't listened to previous episodes, you're podcasting from a closet, right? And I'm podcasting from our second bathroom, which means we live in a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom condo. So our whole family uses one bathroom because I've turned the second one into basically my permanent podcasting studio. And it's messy, right? But It works. We're making it work. So
it's
just
life.
Ignore the mops that are on the wall over here usually. And, yeah,
it's life, right? And I know I see these influencers on there, and it's like the kitchen is, perfect and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, listen, I have a beautiful kitchen. I do. I'm very fortunate. It's beautiful. The sink has always got dirty dishes in it. Like there's never, unless the housekeeper has just been here, there is not a moment when my sink does not have dirty dishes in it, right? Or there's not, a pot where somebody like dumped out pasta water and put the pot on the stove and never washed the pot. Like that is life here, right? And so you see these influencers and they've got like fuzzy throw pillows everywhere and stuff. I'm like, nah, that's just not. It's not how the vast majority of people live. If you do and it's working for you, like I'm so happy for you. That's awesome because you are being your authentic self. And so are we. And it's usually a mess. So, but we're good. We're homeschooling. We love homeschooling. We love parenting. We come here, we show up, we discuss it, and we're thrilled you're here. So this is our weekly virtual book club episode. We've been discussing the Homeschooler's Guide to Portfolios and Transcripts by Loretta Heuer, and today we'll be discussing chapters 9 and 10.
Yeah, so our book discussion started with a super deep dive into portfolios. Then we explored transcripts just as deeply, and now we're shifting our focus to college applications. I feel like this is not quite as deep as the transcripts and portfolio sections. And I think that's mostly because it's important to note that this book was published in 2000. And a lot has changed in the last 25 years, both in homeschooling and even just in applying for colleges, right? Homeschooling has definitely become more common. And while people still have tons of misconceptions about homeschooling, the overall understanding, especially at the collegiate admissions level, has definitely improved to a degree.
Yeah, I totally agree. Overall, I feel like this book has provided us with some really useful tools. I've definitely learned something from this book. But when it comes to the college admissions process, it makes it sound really daunting and like this horrendous uphill climb for homeschoolers. So if you're new to homeschooling and you're reading this and thinking, oh my gosh, my kid's never going to get into college, this is super out of date when it comes to kids getting into college. So consider this study by the Institute of Education Sciences, which is a branch of the U.S. Department of Education. And it's this whole long study. You can research it. We can link it in our bio. You can DM us for it. We'll gladly send you the link. But the general synopsis of it says, research comparing homeschooling to traditional public schools suggests that homeschooled students generally perform well in college. Studies show that homeschooled students often have higher ACT scores, GPAs, and graduation rates than their peers from public schools. Additionally, they tend to adjust well socially and experience less depression. While there is some variability in college admissions processes for homeschooled students, overall, they are well prepared for the challenges of higher education. However, college admissions officers may need better tools to evaluate homeschooled applicants effectively. Now, this was done in 2016, so we're talking 8 years ago. And even then, the exponential growth in homeschooling since 2016 has been incredible. So even that 2016 study is pretty darn out of date, but still super positive as far as the implications of homeschoolers getting into college. And I think it's important to note that it's Department of Education, right? We look at some sources and you look at the source and you're like, yeah, but it's like a super pro homeschool group talking about, yeah, homeschoolers do great. This is the Department of Education. It's pretty much as they, I mean, I actually think that they have less of a stake in saying that homeschoolers do well in college because each individual school is losing funding every time somebody chooses to homeschool. So for them to say it, I'd take that as truth.
Yeah, no, for sure. Though I do think that in some ways, the pandemic actually caused a backslide in understanding. I don't know if you feel the same, but I mean, sure, lots of people decided to homeschool their kids after schools initially closed down. We know a lot of people who that was kind of their push. It was for us, right? After the pandemic, we had the chance to go back to a brick and mortar school, to do private school or something like that. And we decided, let's stick with homeschooling and truly embrace all of the things that can come with homeschooling. But the flip side of that is that across the United States, at least, parents saw super ineffectual school at home during the pandemic. And in many places, when the kids did eventually return to the classroom, many kids were an entire grade or sometimes more behind grade level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like this school at home that happened did not work well for a lot of people and a lot of families. And a lot of parents, especially moms who got stuck with it, but parents across the board were like, this is horrible. I could never homeschool my kids.
Right.
Like, look, we know the craziness of brick and mortar schools and teachers trying to quickly pivot to provide remote virtual school doesn't reflect actual homeschooling. But it seems to me that a lot of Americans now think that they have an even better idea of what homeschooling does and doesn't provide. And like, let's be real, it's not a great picture.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, like in some ways, a lot more people have a much better understanding of what it is. But I feel like a huge percentage of the population now has a really skewed idea of how little kids learn when they're homeschooling.
And how isolating it was.
Yeah, how isolating it is, how you don't ever see anyone else, and how the materials, you don't get very much, and you don't get very much feedback, and you don't actually really learn well that way. And, like that's not actually homeschooling. That wasn't even virtual schooling or remote schooling, right? Because virtual schooling, you can get an entire teaching degree in how to teach virtual school. I have a friend who is a virtual school teacher, and she, it's totally different classroom management and classroom engagement, and the things that they teach are super, super different from how they teach you to do in a brick and mortar school. The reality is most of the public school teachers in the United States who suddenly had to try to become virtual teachers overnight had not had any of that training or support. Okay, so with all of that said, let's dive in. Chapter 9. We've got chapter 9, and I think I have the first talking points.
Yeah.
So chapter 9 is called Preparing for College Admissions. I got to be honest here. I'm over the book, right? I'm happy that next week is our last week with this book, and we may even end up doing some other kind of a wrap up because we finished all of the chapters. We have the appendices, which is full of a lot of great examples. And I think we got good things from this book, but I'm done with this book. I don't know how you feel, Meagan.
Okay, so I made a note, and I didn't put it in my show notes here, but I did make a note on page 214, which is not sequential, but it relates to what you're saying. At the bottom of the page, it says the rule of thumb: if it enhances you, by all means use it. If it is simply repeating in short form what has been said elsewhere, consider leaving it out. And I wrote in the margin, I was like, I feel this is ironic because she repeats herself a lot, right? Like, and so it kind of puts a point on your thing too. I was like, we're done. I got it a while ago, right?
Yeah.
But I really liked the portfolio section because she looked at portfolios in a really different way than I was familiar with, and so I feel like I took a ton out of that. I feel like this college admissions section is so outdated. I did pull some stuff from it, but this was less helpful for me. If anything, I ended up, while I was reading, had to go get my phone charger and plug my phone in because I found myself Googling the today version of everything that she was talking about, as opposed to just reading the book. And I was like, oh, my battery is now dying because I've spent more time on my phone than I have reading the book. But I did learn a lot of really cool information online.
Yeah, that was it. I'm not sure if I actually put it in my show notes, but I'm real big on that. Like, I was thinking a lot of this, like, just make sure that you get a current book on college admissions, or, read articles. There are lots of blog posts and articles and things like that. But like, if you're doing it, I agree, there are some things in here that are useful and good to think about and some decent takeaways. But definitely get something that has been done post-pandemic, right? It'll be a little hard to find, but the landscape for college admissions has really changed post-pandemic, and making sure that you're being aware of that is important. But back to the actual book. So on the very first page, on 176, she has a quote that says, 10 years ago, or 35 years ago, taking into consideration the age of the book, if you were a homeschooled college applicant, you'd be a rarity. Fortunately, times have changed, and homeschooled applicants have become more common. They are still interesting, still a little puzzling, and they still add a bit of novelty to the freshman class, but they're not all that unusual. And it's a weird way to put it, but I do think that there's some truth to that, right?
Even still.
Yeah, still, because, we know that homeschoolers in college, they do well, and homeschool kids are statistically more likely to go to college than kids graduating from a public school. But it's still such a small percentage that I can't imagine really any major public university or private university, for that matter, has more than 5, maybe 10% of the student body that was homeschooled or did some kind of alternative education beyond standard public or private school, So, I mean, there's novelty to that. If you fall in the less than 10% crowd, you're a novelty, whether you like it or not.
Yep. Yeah, I completely agree with that.
Yeah. So then just on the next page, this was where I was really like it started here for me, and it continues through the 2 chapters. And I'm not crazy about some of the language in this chapter and the next chapter. So on this page, she says, quote, "Your portfolio needs to demonstrate that you have academic and personal potential, even though you engaged in a novel approach to learning during your high school years." And I was like, really? You have value and potential, even though? There's like a little bit of ick factor with the way that she
there.
So I'm like, and it starts like it started kind of right at the top, and it flows all the way through the rest of the book. So
yeah, you can tell that she was like a pioneer to some extent, right? Which I guess if you think about it, it makes sense, right? The bulk of the early homeschoolers were dare I say it, the long denim skirt, the outside world does not exist, 1 + 1 = Jesus math curriculum, right? And so there wasn't as much going into general college. A lot of those kids were going, if they were going to college, and let's be honest, boys, right? Especially in like the truly fundamentalist sections, right?
Yeah.
They were going to Christian colleges. So they weren't odd as homeschoolers, right? So she probably is a little bit odd, right? Like you were saying, the pandemic had potentially negative effects on the people's perception of homeschooling. I think about that docuseries Shiny Happy People on Amazon, right? That was all about, fundamentalist Christians weaponizing education basically to fulfill their mission. And I was like, when I watched that, I remember just being like, oh shit, this is bad news for the rest of us, because they're going to think we're all like this now, right? And so that's like the group that I'm thinking of as kind of the early pioneers of, so much within the homeschool movement. And they weren't applying to go to Boston College and Stanford and every place else, because those places wouldn't have aligned with the ideology that they were sheltering their kids from for the past 18 years.
Yeah.
So
No, so true.
yeah, I think in a way she kind of is that oddball, because it was like she was a homeschooler who was homeschooling for not that reason, which at that time was less common.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's it. She was a pioneer. The book is dated. And so, in some ways, I feel like it's kind of like that uncle that you only want to listen to some of what he has to say. Family gatherings.
Well, speaking of dated, on page 178, she kind of talks about the fact that homeschoolers have to prove their their background, their foundation, because they don't have GPAs or SATs. And so, we don't have to dive into it. That's just not true, right? Homeschoolers have GPAs and SATs. Maybe they didn't when she wrote this. Maybe the SAT wasn't accessible for homeschoolers. I don't know.
It is constantly changing. So please, if you are listening to this, be aware of that. If you aren't a particularly academics focused homeschooler and it's time to help your kiddo get into college, know that something that was published in 2020 is not going to be particularly helpful now, because things have really changed just in the last 4 years. Yeah,
for sure. She talks on 179 a little bit about getting homeschooler specific requirements, which I think is valid to a degree, and we'll talk about that. I've got some notes later in my notes, but I just wanted to point, she kind of talks about going and finding that information. Most colleges, at least that I've encountered, have career day, open house, portfolio day. They have all of these opportunities for people to come in and meet with admissions and meet with professors and better understand the school and what the expectations are. Take them, right? We went to a parent info session for dual enrollment when I was living in Texas. And it was just for high school kids and their parents to better understand dual enrollment. This was at Austin Community College. They brought out this full team. They had a representative from every department there. They handed out resources. We walked out of that meeting knowing who we were supposed to call, what our next steps were. Like, take advantage of those things, because you don't have to go digging for the people the way she does in the book. Most places are hosting events where you can start making those connections early. Even our community college here in Charleston, we had come here looking for houses, and we hadn't moved here yet, but I had seen a billboard when we were house hunting here about a virtual open house that they were hosting. And so I was able to attend that when we were still living in Texas and get information, so that when we got here, I already knew what was what. So even if you're not local to your school, there's a chance that you can even Zoom with an admissions person or something. I've dealt with a number of people at all these different schools that my kids have either attended or looked into attending or are researching for 4-year options. I've never found an admissions person who's gatekeeping information, right? Like, they're all super helpful to just be like, yeah, right here. They generally speaking love the university that they work for, are happy to help young people come. They're happy you're interested. So start making those connections and just ask questions. It's not as hard as it sounds in the book.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know about that. We're not quite to that point yet. And I just feel like I haven't seen any of those resources here. That doesn't mean they're not here, but I haven't seen that. And so I'm going to make a point of keeping an eye out.
Yeah, because even with a younger learner, I took my youngest just because my oldest was going, and he goes everywhere. And he was like, this is amazing. Like, loved it. We went to career day, and it's a community college here. So we're not talking, $60,000 a semester. We're talking free community college where I live. And every department was set up with students, professors, administrators that you could go through. You could go through nursing, you could go through welding, you could go through whatever. And then the building that my kiddo was in for his classes is a brand new building, and it was a little bit further, and they had brought like a huge coach in for the day, or a couple, I think, actually, because they kind of ran back and forth, where you could go from kind of where the cluster of the original buildings were over to this new building where his stuff was. And so we took the bus over there, and they had continuously running information sessions from admissions where they kind of told you a little bit about the history of the college and what to expect and how to make the most of your day. Then in this big open section, they had a bunch of employers who were local. Here in Charleston, we have Boeing, which if you watch the Netflix docuseries, they're having a pretty rough time right now with like doors falling off planes and stuff. But we have Boeing, we have Bosch, we have Volvo, we have the military here. There's a huge Air Force base in Charleston, right? And so all these companies were set up there too to talk about an internship program where you could go to school and intern at the same time, and paid internship. And so, yeah, there's so much stuff that it exists. When we went to the one in Austin, Texas at the community college, they actually they handed us a paper and it said, okay, if you go to these 10 high schools, this is your advisor. If you go to these 8 high schools, this is your advisor. But they had one advisor just for homeschooled kids, so that that person knew that all of our paperwork was going to look funky. All of our kids were going to be like, like none of it was we weren't going to have the form that all the kids from school had and like all that kind of stuff. And they understood homeschooling better than the other advisors. And that way it wasn't like every person trying to swim upstream with an advisor who, where you're the minority in this population. We had a specific homeschool advisor, which was pretty awesome. So yeah, I mean, just toss yourself in there. They're happy to give you information and they're happy to help. What I have found so far, there's a bad apple in every bunch, right? But if they are, you don't want your kid there anyway. So
yeah, true story.
Right. So we both have notes on 181. What did you put for 181, Amanda?
So mine is just more general. Pages 180 to 181 are questionnaires, sample questionnaires. So it's one of those like gray call out boxes that she does a lot of. And I just, in general, I liked them. I definitely, if I was using this resource, I would type them up and space them out better. Like they're all kind of like 1.5 line spacing, and some of them just need like a number answer and some of them need, like actual notes. And there are things that aren't appropriate, like you wouldn't use anymore, whatever. But I thought it was a good idea. And I do like that. Like it appeals to that organized side of me. Like I like having just one, set questionnaire that you kind of fill out for each of the schools that you're looking at. And I think it's a great way to empower your kiddo to be able to like put it all down. And then, maybe eventually you do put it in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that so you can better compare. But just a good way to kind of get all of those answers in one place and have all the same answers, because it's really easy when you're comparing things, big things and small things, to like remember to get this piece about this one, but not about the other one, but you got some other piece about the other one that you don't have about this one. And like, it's hard to make an informed decision when you're comparing apples to oranges. And all colleges in some ways are apples to oranges, but we can at least try to have the same information about how much they weigh, right? So yeah. I liked these pages in general.
So this is one of the sections where I really heavily started Googling, like how does it work, right? And I just kind of picked schools from thin air, right? So the really interesting thing was the first one that I looked at was Brown, because we've kind of kept coming back to that after our conversation with Jonathan Mooney. And I had said in a previous episode that I had looked it up and it said that Brown still requires an SAT or ACT, which I was surprised about given how kind of go with the flow their educational path is, it sounds like, once you're in the school. So what was really interesting was last night I went down a way deeper rabbit hole and came to find out.
No, you went down a rabbit hole?
I know.
I'm shocked.
Hence the need for the phone charger. Right? I was like, I'm on red. I'm going to lose this. So it turns out they do require SAT, ACT. However, they have absolutely no minimum score. And that is not something that would define your ability to get into Brown or not. And they do not require SAT or ACT for transfer students. And I think in this day and age, not all, but so many homeschoolers are coming in with college credits before they even get there, that I think we have to talk about that fact too. Like, this is the process if you're applying for a 4-year college directly from high school, right? No college credits. I think that's becoming, I don't want to say the minority at all, because there's a whole hodgepodge of things people do, but there's so many people that are tapping into community college now, or dual enrollment, or ASU's universal learner, or something like that before their kids graduate, that so many of our homeschool kids are transfer students. And that process looks entirely different than applying as a freshman.
Which is true. However, it is also worth noting that your kid can have a lot of college credits, a lot of dual enrollment credits, and still go in as a freshman student.
Uh-huh.
So, like if you get there and you're at that point, like we can help direct you, but there are plenty of groups online and that focus on that. So you get to choose, right? Does it make more sense for your kid to go in as a transfer student for X, Y, or Z? Does it make more sense for them to go in as a freshman, maybe for
Right.
housing or scholarship purposes or financial aid? Like you get to choose what that looks like. And just because your kid is going in with 30 or 40 college credits doesn't automatically mean they have to be a transfer student.
That is also true. Or that those 30 or 40 credits will be accepted.
That they'll be, that they'll even care about them beyond their high school transcript.
Yeah. So I found that interesting. So Brown was one of the schools that I looked at. And for all of these schools, I literally just typed in the name of the school and homeschool application requirements. And every school that I typed in, I was directed immediately to a homeschooling specific page on that university website. So the Brown page has 4 of those little kind of drop downs where it's got a question. And then when you hit the little button, it drops it down. So it says, is the application process different for homeschooled applicants? Our evaluation process is the same for all first-year applicants, but homeschooled applicants may present some of the required documents in a different format than what would be provided by traditional schools. So they're open to receiving documentation that is not typical. And again, you can call admissions and talk to them about that. What might that be? What have you gotten before that you found really helpful, etc.? Okay. What should I submit if I do not have a traditional high school transcript? I'm really not sure why you wouldn't have a traditional high school transcript. Like, they're not that hard to make, etc., but there's guidance there. And so there's some other info there. Then I looked at Penn State. So it's saying all prospective students, whether in a high school program or a homeschool program, will be subject to the same admission standards. So we're not being treated as pariahs like they are in the book, right? You go with the flow. Since some students in homeschool programs may not follow a traditional high school curriculum, they're open to that too. We may request more detailed documentation of their high school coursework and evaluations of progress as needed. Below are the basic admissions requirements for all applicants, though depending on the major you choose, you may have to fulfill additional requirements. So they request, there's 3 bullet points here: academic coursework prerequisites, level of achievement or GPA, and standardized test scores if provided. So they've got some info there. Stanford, I went California. I figured I'd get a little
Thanks.
Geographical bouncing, right?
Represent, yeah.
So again, I entered the same Google criteria. Homeschooled students, like all other students seeking undergraduate admission to Stanford, apply using the Common Application, which is very popular. These additional guidelines may be helpful as you complete your application. So they do say, we expect that you have successfully undertaken a rigorous course of study distributed across the humanities, sciences, math, social studies, and languages. In addition to a transcript, we encourage you to submit a detailed description of your curriculum, but it is not necessary to follow a prescribed or approved homeschooling curriculum. Hello, this whole unschoolers, how will they ever get into college? Just fine. We are interested in how you have gone about the learning process, not how many courses you have completed. In particular, we would like to understand how and why your family chose homeschooling, how your learning was organized, what benefits accrued, and what, if any, choices you had to make to accomplish this type of education. So it goes on just a little bit more, but generally speaking, every website that I looked at was like, yep, homeschoolers are treated the same. We're open to, if you need a little different documentation here or there, we might ask a couple of questions, but there's not this kind of leper colony approach to, homeschooling that Loretta describes in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Yeah. So I liked that. I thought that was pretty cool. So feel free, head to Google, have some fun. I had a great time.
Yeah. So, this for me brought up, again, it seems like all I've done is be on Facebook the last couple of days, because this whole week, both episodes, I'm talking about how I was in Facebook on this group helping with this or that, right? It's that time of year. There are so many questions and people asking questions and needing help. So I'm in a group that was just talking about how some schools are accepting computer science, computer languages as the foreign language. I think your kiddo was able to do that, right? For college. And they were asking whether or not that would apply to the Ivies and their 4-year requirement for high school foreign language. I did not realize that kind of across the board, Ivy League schools require 4 years of high school level foreign language. And the general consensus in that group was that people were crazy. Absolutely not. That you absolutely have to have a true foreign language that is spoken in another country, and you have to have 4 years of it. And it doesn't matter where you're coming from or what your situation is. That is an expectation. And so I was like, well, that's interesting. And I didn't have time to go Google it the way Meagan did. I was not that on top of it. I personally have like major lesson plans that I have to get done in the next week. And I'm also now planning like our crazy next world schooling trip. And I didn't hit up Google the way I normally would. But it did kind of get me thinking, like, yes, there are opportunities where there's some wiggle room in the requirements if you're a homeschool student versus a public school student, a traditional student. I think it was Stanford that even said, like, we're not as concerned about how many courses you've actually completed, but what you've actually learned. But there might be some things that there just isn't wiggle room on. And, you just really have to pay attention. Yep. If your kiddo is aiming for an Ivy League school, or even not an Ivy League school, but some kind of school that is specific, very specific to what they really want to do long term, you need to look into what they're going to require for homeschoolers and make sure not this like, well, everyone is saying that, right, you can do this and use this, so it'll be fine. Like, you do have to just like everything else, right? We've chosen an alternative path, and it does mean that you've got to do a little bit of research and make sure that you're going to make it work.
It was interesting because the thing that you said the person shared on in Facebook was about a foreign language spoken in another country, and it makes me wonder if they would accept ASL or Braille, which I don't know, feels pretty terrible if they wouldn't.
Right. Or, I mean, that thing they were saying, like, in another country, but Latin's not actually spoken anymore. But
thank God I took Latin. I wouldn't go to that country.
But, I mean, like, surely they would accept Latin. So, like, where's the line? Like, where do you draw that line? And what is that? But that's one of those things, if you have a few that you for sure have on your list.
Call and ask those questions.
Yep. Find out for sure before you get so far down the rabbit hole or so far into your high school career that you can't fix that. In your last year of high school, you cannot get 4 years of foreign language, no matter how accelerated you do.
You'd have to literally like move to another country in order to count that, right? It's like,
like move and do like full immersion in a local program that only speaks that. And even then you'd have to be gifted in language to be able to say that you've done that.
And absorb it that quickly and all that.
Yeah. Right.
Yep, I totally agree.
All right. So my next comment was on 182, and you might be able to speak to this better. It's under the section titled Working with Admissions Staff. And she's just talking about like really reaching out to the admissions staff and finding an advocate, one person who is going to know you and your application and be your advocate and help shepherd you through the process. And I was like, I'm just not sure how relevant that is these days. I feel like most schools, maybe not most, but a lot of schools have an online application process where then those applications get read by readers, right? That's a really popular side hustle job for stay-at-home moms right now, is to like go get training on how to be a college application reader. And they hire these people, they train them, and their whole job is to be like the first level readers for all of the applications and decide which ones actually get looked at by admissions people. So it kind of made me be like, well, how useful is it to have someone in the admissions office? And I feel like unless your name is on a building or you're like an alumni, you don't get to jump the line, you don't get to leapfrog over the readers. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the cynical me. I don't know.
I think so. I can compare it to like corporate stuff, right? Because we've talked about the parallels between the corporate America and American education. And I feel like, so a role that my husband took on at one point, he knew somebody and he had applied for this job. He knew somebody. He said to that person, hey, can you inquire for me? Can you get to HR? Can you go this route, whatever. His application had already been deselected, right? His stuff. And he ended up getting the job, right? But he needed somebody to physically pull it out. And so I feel like with the readers, my thing would actually be that you actually have more importance on allying yourself with somebody there who'd be like, hey, how come this person, I've met them, this person is on it. Like, how come their stuff hasn't crossed through here? Because somebody literally had to go get my husband's thing out of the discard pile, right? and bring it back in and be like, oh, holy crap, how did this person end up in the discard pile, right? And this was before, this was a while ago, so this was before bots were doing quite as much as they're doing right now. I think an actual person put it in the discard pile. So I know, like, when we've gone to stuff at universities so far, I leave with business cards, right? And to your point, we talked about thank you cards, like in a previous episode. Yeah, the kiddo is totally writing, like, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciated learning more, and making sure that they stand out so that if they do end up in a discard pile somewhere along the way, right, they do have that connection. Like, I'm so tainted by my time in corporate America that was soul crushing and miserable and awful that, like, I just walked away with, like, it doesn't matter how good you are, it matters who you know. So to your point, we don't have, our names are not on buildings. Like, I'm not that kind of person. Not because I'm morally against it, but because I can't afford a building. Right. But like, so yeah, you're going to have to network in other ways, peeps. Okay. Like make sure you stand out. Okay. So yeah, I'm still totally in favor of, like, showing up to the events, getting business cards, sending thank you notes, making sure that you've stood out in some way. I can't tell you it's going to help, but I'm like attack on all fronts kind of person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, like, part of that is just the difference too. I went to university, but I didn't go to any schools that were anywhere. I didn't apply to any schools that were anywhere close to where I lived. So I didn't have any of those kinds of personal experiences myself, even decades ago, right, when we were doing this. So I guess there's a bit of a disconnect there for me as well. And how that fits in and how you make that work and what all of that looks like. But we're also, several years away from worrying about it, beyond like the community college, like dual enrollment type stuff. So,
and it'll look completely different again, probably by then too, right?
Well, right. Like every 2 years, it's like, whoa, it's totally changed.
Maybe we'll have universal college by then. You never know. Right? Wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be amazing. I can live in a dream
world, can't I?
I'm saying I think that's a dream world for sure, but that would be amazing.
Maybe we could tackle health insurance first, but then universal college, right? It would be great.
Yeah.
On 183, she talks about prepping for interviews, which I did do a rabbit hole search of universities that are still conducting interviews, under what circumstances, etc., and they are still at play to some extent, not all schools. One of the things that I really liked was she talked about role-playing questions that you think might come up that are specific to homeschooling. And I was like, oh, yes. Because I know when my kids, when you talk to them about homeschooling, they're like, we just live life. Like, we just do the thing. I don't understand the question. Like, they can't on the fly kind of express it. And I get it, because sometimes I have a tough time expressing to people how we approach education and why it works so well for us, right? And so you could totally see for a kid who's in a high stakes situation, etc., trying to do that off the top of their head, no bueno. So I liked the idea of role playing and kind of doing that, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I can see that. And then we both have comments on 184. I think yours might come first. So why don't you go ahead and do 184, and then I'll give my much quicker, shorter comment.
Mine's actually at the bottom. So there's a thing here that she talks about an article that was written about a homeschooled kid who goes to Harvard and what a novelty that was. And I tried to find a statistic of how many homeschoolers get accepted to Harvard or have applied to Harvard. I couldn't find any. I tried to go as deep as possible with not taking like a week to explore this, but what I did find, which I thought was really cool, was a Harvard study. And again, feel free to message us anytime. I save all the links in my show notes, so I'm happy to send you links if you need them. But it looked at, which I thought was an odd population, but it says the scholars analyzed data of over 12,000 children of nurses, okay, who participated in surveys between 1999 and 2010, and found that homeschooled children were about 1/3 more likely to engage in volunteerism and have higher levels of forgiveness in early adulthood than those children who attended public schools. Homeschooled children were also more likely to attend religious services in adulthood than children educated in public schools, which the researchers noted it correlates with lower risk of alcohol, drug abuse, depression, and unaliving. Now, I would like to add that they're correlating religion and a lower risk of unaliving. And I feel like we would not be the progressive podcasters that we are if we didn't mention the fact that if you are a Mormon teen who's a member of the LGBTQIA plus community, teen or even young person, that unaliving rate is off the charts. And that Utah is actually the highest, statistically speaking, for teens and unaliving. And there is a strong religious component there. So I will disagree with Harvard a little bit on that one front, right? But generally speaking, this is a study that came out of Harvard that says homeschool kids do great in the real world. So in this book, they talk about, oh my gosh, one homeschooler made it to Harvard. Harvard as a whole seems to have a pretty positive view of homeschooling. So again, just to kind of point out, like, this is a little outdated, and I don't really think it's like a super duper concern for us at this point.
Yeah, no, I can for sure see that. So yeah, on that same page on 184, there's a little pull-out box called Try to Relax. And first off, I was like, because that works so well, right?
Yeah,
anytime
exactly.
someone
Don't
tells
be
you
anxious.
Yeah, don't just relax, like calm down, like, oh, sure, yeah, because
I'm cured.
that works. But that said, there was a little snippet of advice in there that I did really like. She said, write out 4 or 5 of your questions so that you'll have them ready should the conversation lag. And I just thought that's one of those like general life skills that sometimes we forget to teach. And usually we learn it along the way, sometime after a really awkward conversation that we wish we could redo. Right.
You replay in your head for a really long time afterwards.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so, like just one of those little reminders, like teach your kids, practice it before they go into a new social situation or any kind of a thing where there could be a lag in conversation. Talk about some general questions that they could throw out to help move things along. Mm-hmm. And, it doesn't have to apply just to college admissions interviews. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I totally agree. I love that. I didn't pick up on that when I was reading, but I like that. I made a note on 186. She talks about marketing your angle. How has homeschooling allowed you to maximize your learning? Has it contributed to academic enrichment or acceleration? The pursuit of a subject in depth, learning about a diverse range of people. And basically, she goes on to say, like, school students don't have the time most of the time, just logistically can't go as deep as our kids can or can't explore interests to the level that our kids can. So market that, right? Don't flip the conversation. Instead of being like the oddball homeschooler who, does Civil War reenactments, it's like, oh no, I am the super cool badass, homeschooler who loves history and immerses myself in community and has these hands-on experiences and this unique knowledge base. Like, flip it around and market it in a way that helps you, which I thought was interesting. And then we both called out the call-out box on 187. I just put a giant orange highlighter heart in the middle of it. What did you love about it, Amanda?
Well, so did you like the multifaceted homeschoolers call-out box or the exercise box?
Oh, mine was the exercise box.
Okay, me too.
Okay.
So yeah, I just, so on page 187, it goes on to 188. There's just an exercise and it says, this is a homeschooler who has, and then it's got blank spots for you to fill in: unusual skills for an adolescent, skills taken to a sophisticated level, unique service opportunities, mature leadership responsibilities, offbeat travel experiences, employment in a specialized field, unusual hobbies or interests. And sometimes I just feel like this is one of those things where you need a little bit of guidance isn't the right word. Like maybe just, like kind of leading you down the right path so that you can like get those juices rolling, get those thoughts on paper. And it does play in well with that. Are you a homeschooler who, or are you a person that did this and homeschooled?
Yep.
Helping you like identify those unique attributes that are really going to help versus hinder. And again, that marketing, like once you identify them, it can help you market your angle.
Leverage it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I like it. Well, that wraps up chapter 9. Moving right along.
It does. So, okay, before we get into chapter 10, did you know we host a Facebook group? So if you've been listening to us for a little while, you do know, but if not, we do. We have a Facebook group. Come hang out with us. All you have to do is go on Facebook, search Homeschool Moms Unfiltered, and then filter for groups. We chat homeschooling, parenting, life in general, the wins, the not so wins. We are an inclusive, kind group. So as long as you can be kind, come join us. Definitely make sure you fill out the questions. We've had a few people recently who haven't been answering the questions, and like you got to answer the questions so we know that you're a real person. Yeah. So if you're looking for a drama-free community, please come hang out with us. We'd love to have you.
Absolutely. All right. So chapter 10 is A Homeschooler's Comprehensive Guide to College Applications.
It is. So again, I have the first thing to say. It seems to be a bit of a theme. So for me, I like right off the bat, the first thing she does is list all of these things to include in your application packet that you're going to mail off in a manila envelope.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was like,
after making photocopies of it too, because she talks about really photocopying a lot of things here. Yeah.
Yeah. Photocopying it. I don't know, maybe just scan it and save it and then print it off if you need to. But so yeah, again, it's one of those things. Is it dated? Yes, without a doubt. Are there still some good ideas in here? Also, yes. But we said it earlier in the episode, please read something more current before you apply to college, right? Things are changing very quickly. Technology, ideas around whether we're accepting standardized tests, we need them, we don't need them, you can include them, but we may or may not look at them. Like it's constantly changing how they're using AI. There's so much. So just look at what is the current trend whenever you get around to actually applying for college. That's my big thing.
I have a vision of her like strapping a diskette to a homing pigeon. Like it's, like, yeah, it's a bit out of date. I just made a really quick note on 191. She talks about things to avoid. And one of them is a one-dimensional image. And I thought, yes, you don't want to come across one-dimensional because we hear all the time about how colleges are looking for people who are into a wide variety of things and stuff like that. But I feel like there's also something to be said for walking the line between one-dimensional image and being all over the place, right? And just being like, where colleges are like, oh my gosh, they must not do any of these things well because they have 700 things written down, right?
Yeah.
So
that's interesting because that perfectly flows into my next thought, which was on the next page, 192. And she gives an example of an introductory letter. And so I'll start off by saying that I'm not sold on this idea of including an introductory letter. First off, I'm just not sold on it. Second off, I'm not positive that most online applications even have a great place to include it.
Right.
But then beyond that, she gives an actual example that her kid used. And first off, there's again that icky language. The quote was, "Most of my education has been done at home in a program designed by my parents and myself." And I was like, I don't think that actually helps your case. Like that's just like, that is not the way I would phrase that to sound good, first off. And then second off, it goes on that like that talk of like, okay, don't be one dimensional. But then this kid lists so many interests. He's got violin, he's got viola, he's got Irish studies, he's got US politics, he's got local politics, he's got federal level of politics, he's in choir, he loves history. And I'm like, maybe the university was like, man, he's really multidimensional. But me, I was like, what the is he gonna actually study? Like homeboy needs to, I mean, like you can't even cover that many electives in your first year if you wanted to. Like, how's he ever going to get enough credits to graduate in something? Like, I don't know.
Excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can be too multidimensional.
Yeah, I think there's a line to be walked there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you and I both liked the writing prompts for the essays, right? Which I thought was pretty cool. We took different things from it. Yours was,
we did. Yeah. I mean, but it was that idea, right? Like for me, just the more general, I hadn't actually thought about it. And again, I'm many decades out from applying for university, and we're not there with my kiddo. Like I'm just at the point where I'm thinking like, oh, maybe we could have him sit down with a community college professor. Maybe we could attend some interesting lectures for fun, but like we're not doing any kind of actual applications. But she did say schools' essay questions can be most revealing as to the type of students they are seeking. And I think that's really true, right? Like the questions, anytime you have an essay question or an open-ended question, they're leading you to give them what they want to hear. And you can be tone deaf to that and talk about whatever you want, or you can pay attention to it and be like, actually, I don't think this is where I belong. Like if this is their focus, if this is what they want me to talk about, I don't think that this is really the best fit for me, right?
Yeah.
Or it makes you realize like, oh, I really, like I like where they're going with this, and I can, like I think that's interesting and it encourages me to think outside the box or whatever. But like just realize that it's not just a random question. They didn't use an AI generator to give them essay questions like, oh, what essay questions should we? Yeah, they have a purpose. They're looking for something, and be aware of that. Mm-hmm. And then you got a little bit more out of them.
I thought they were just fun, creative writing prompts. Like I kind of wanted to do them. Right? So There's one on 199. It says you have just completed a 300-page autobiography. Please submit page 217. And I was like, oh, I like that. And then there was another one where, now this tells you how dated this book is because her kid was applying to college like in the 90s, probably, right? And one of the topics was write the headline newspaper article for January 1st, 2015. So looking into the future, right? Which of course 2015 has since passed. And it's really cool. So they did, her kiddo talked about the recent split of California into 3 separate states and talking about like a Cold War between regions of the United States, between, the GOP and the Democrats and things like that. And I thought it was really just a fun creative writing prompt. I was like, oh, now I want to like lead a class with that or something. And do that. I thought I liked it. So I just thought it sounded fun. Forget about college.
Yeah. Although I will say, okay, so I have a comment on that specific example. So from page 196 to 200, she's giving examples of essays that her son used to get into college. And spoiler alert, he got accepted by all of them. Okay. That's fine, whatever. And I want to point out that you can go online, you can Google and find loads of essays that are from students who were accepted to specific colleges. You can Google that, like UC Berkeley, essays of accepted students or things like that. And you can see things. So you have an idea of what's currently being put out there and what's getting kids into school. But that specific one about the newspaper article, I think it's interesting. I think the content he included was very good and insightful and creative, and it did do a great job of showing his deep understanding of geopolitical issues and the landscape and all of that. But for as much as she harps on format and giving them what they want and all of this stuff, I was like, this is a freaking essay. It's a newspaper article that's formatted as an essay. This is not a newspaper article. Like, why did she not catch that and be like, okay, you like, if it's a newspaper article, you cannot have such large chunks of text. Like,
Right.
that would have been an entire column in a newspaper, right? Like,
That's so true. Yeah.
just one of those little things of like, oh, come on now, you're not walking the walk.
Let's see. I had a note on 201 that was just quick and easy. She talks about starting to get your letters of recommendation and early. Like, if your kid takes a class as a freshman, quote unquote, like, these things are all fairly irrelevant in our world, but like early in their high school career, let's say, don't wait until you're doing college up, because then the person's like, which one was your kid again? Right. And trying to get a decent letter out of that person. Mm-hmm. So I liked that one. And then on 203, there was a section about the fact that college officials are really familiar with typical awards and achievements that are given out through the public school system, or typical sports awards and achievements and things like that, but they're oftentimes not familiar with the really quirky stuff that our kids sometimes get involved with. And so we can't necessarily understand them. We can't necessarily expect them to understand the gravity of what you've accomplished if we haven't told them what that thing is. So I thought that was, I have one kid who does really whacked out stuff. So I was like, yep, they're totally not going to get that if she doesn't connect those dots for them.
Yeah, I can for sure see that. For me, on that same page, there's a discussion, and I felt like she didn't really go into it quite enough. She talks about it off and on in this chapter about extracurricular and or co-curricular activities and how these are really part of the schooling or the learning for homeschool kids, and they would be listed as the extracurricular or co-curricular activities for a traditionally brick and mortar school kid. And I just kind of felt like, okay, yes, sometimes you know, that's hard to differentiate, but really, why are we being so difficult here on this? Like, if a public school kid or a private school kid is going to put that down as their extracurricular or their co-curricular, put it on your freaking extracurricular or co-curricular list. Like, they want to see the list, put it on the list. Like, you don't have to be like, but that was part of our regular learning, so it cannot be extracurricular. Like, just don't be difficult. Like,
yeah.
Right.
We talked about that with grading an episode or two ago. Like, stop overcomplicating things that don't need to be overcomplicated. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Oh, you have our next note also, I think.
So yeah, she's talked about this throughout the book, but she's got compiling an annotated table of contents. Again, not new, but potentially quite helpful depending on whether or not you can actually include it. Right. Again, this comes down to what kind of application the school is using, if it's one of the online ones, and if there's a space where you can upload extra things, or if it's truly like upload your one essay, upload your 2 recommendation letters, upload, you know, like, and so a lot of this chapter is that kind of stuff, you know, like include a resume. Well, maybe if there's a way to upload it, but maybe not, because it's not a manila envelope and you can't put whatever you want in it.
Exactly, right.
So on page 212, she's talking about, the quote says, when you begin writing your homeschool profile, think of it as a descriptive document, one that would be used as an advertising copy, a press release, or text on a homepage. Keep it to a page or less. Avoid rambling. If you really have to write a homeschool manifesto, fine, but send it to your local newspaper, not the college admissions office. And she doesn't often bust out with humor, so I appreciated that. But it rolls into, on the next page, she gives an example of her homeschool profile. She's written up a letter that's their homeschool profile that's supposed to be the same as a public school profile. I'm like, okay, I don't fully know this. I don't fully understand it, but it includes a mission statement, because high schools have a mission statement, and it 100% made me roll my eyes. Like, I was like, I cannot imagine that this homeschool mission statement helped in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So,
especially in her time frame, I feel like, because she was operating in this thing where homeschoolers were these super oddballs, and then she took it oddball, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, she just says like, she's saying, oh, when we decided not to enroll our son in preschool, we called our home alternative La Famille. And then the name abruptly changed to describe our educational philosophy. And now we call it this. And like, no one cares. Like, it doesn't even explain to me why you chose to homeschool. Like, it does.
the funny thing is she keeps saying like evaluate every artifact. And if it doesn't speak to that person, if they won't understand it.
Yeah, that's it. If it doesn't add a significant value, don't include it. Like, lady. And this, in fairness, this is an excellent example of the fact that you need someone to review your stuff and tell you when. Like, you just you don't need this paragraph.
And you've
you
taken
don't
it
need
a little
this
too
thing.
far. You've gotten a little too philosophical here.
Yeah, exactly. And so I kind of mentioned my last note is on the resume. I mentioned it just a minute ago, but the quote says specifically, a separate resume will be useful only when it presents information that can strengthen your candidacy and for which there is no other place in the application. And again, this will depend on where you're applying and how they let you put things in. But some examples she gave that I was like, okay, I get that. She says, if you intend to major in shoreline ecology,
As one does.
Yeah.
Yeah, so many do.
Yeah. So many. But I mean, I guess if you're homeschooling, you're going to do something wonky, right? You couldn't just go into, I don't know, computer science or something. So yeah. And in the past 6 years, you've traveled extensively from Maine to the Florida Keys, camping in national parks and visiting aquariums. Like, you might want to outline this experience on a resume and include it if there's no other easy way to include it because the essay had to be about something else or whatever. And then she also uses the example if you've started a home-based business. And I can see that, especially if you've started one and you're quite successful, this would definitely apply for some of your kids, Meagan, that like it might be useful to have a business type resume to be able to include because, yeah, you can include that a little bit on your transcript, but you're not really going to be able to show the success that they've had with a business as a teenager on a high school transcript.
That's true.
Like, you're not, you don't get to brag about how much income you've had and how much time you've put into it on a high school transcript, right? Like, obviously you can include it, but it doesn't give it the weight or the value. And so I could see how it would be useful to include that.
Yeah, that's super true. I love it. So next week, all we have left in this book are the appendices. So we'll tackle those next. It's just kind of a bunch of forms and samples and all that good kind of stuff. And you're like, how could you make a whole episode about appendices? You should see how many freaking examples are in this thing. It's a good 60 pages or something. So yeah, it's hefty. So that'll be next week's episode. And then we will move on. Our next book has been moved to my bookshelf, but it's something about new homeschooling, like how to start off homeschooling or something. Homeschooling for beginners. I forget the title, but it is there.
It's like 150 pages of appendices. I just looked it up. So yeah, that's why it gets its own.
We'll be chatting about that. Yeah. But in the meantime, if you love our content, we'd love it if you give us a like wherever you hang out, right? So if that's on Spotify and Instagram or iTunes and Facebook or like whatever your social platform is, whatever your podcasting platform is, a like, a 5-star review, a comment, a whatever, like whatever the thing is there, that thing. We love it. It makes our day when we get them. Whoever sees it first, we send it to the other one. We get really, really excited. And by giving us that little bit of a boost, it kind of helps us shine our bat signal more brightly and find other fun secular homeschoolers who are looking to join a community of awesome people. So we would love it if you could do that. But thank you for joining us today. Tune in next week for the continuation and grand conclusion, if I might say, of our book. But in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.